Good afternoon. On behalf of Chairman of the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, Shri Ashok Singh Thakur, Member Secretary Dr. Ravindra Singh, and all my colleagues, I extend a very warm welcome to Shri Sanjeev Sanyal and all the respected members of the audience. Today is the first lecture in our series on the maritime heritage of India, the Stitch Ship Project, recreating India's ancient shipbuilding tradition by Sanjeev Sanyal. This talk will focus on a 5th century Indian merchant vessel being built in Goa using the original materials and design. The idea is then to sail it along the ancient routes in the Indian Ocean. Sanjeev Sanyal is an economist and a best-selling author who's currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. He served as the principal economic advisor to the Finance Minister for 5 years till February 2022. He has represented India at many international forums such as OECD and G7 and was the co-chair of the G20's Framework Working Group. Prior to joining the government, he spent over 2 decades in the financial markets and was the global strategist and managing director at the Deutsche Bank. He's a history buff and has done extensive primary research on the subject, enabling him to write several best-selling books, including Land of the Seven Rivers, The Ocean of Churn, India in the Ages of Idea, and the Indian Renaissance. He has also published over 200 articles and columns in the leading nationals, apart from co-authoring and editing 6 economic surveys of the Government of India between 2017 and 2022. However, our favorite part of the introduction is that he is a friend of the Trust and a life member of INTAC for over 20 years. And every time we have invited him for a talk or a discussion, he has very kindly obliged. With that, I now hand over to Sanjeev Sanyal. All yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and a very good afternoon to all of you. As a proud member of INTAC, it's always a pleasure to be here. And so I'm going to talk about a topic which is a big favorite of mine, which is about an ancient stitch ship that we are rebuilding or recreating as we speak. So let's get going. This is just an overview. Okay. So as many of you may know, I've written about it in my book also, The Ocean of Churn, that India has one of the oldest maritime histories anywhere in the world. Okay, people when talk about ancient maritime history, etc., they talk about the Phoenicians and so on. Let me say that India's maritime history is at least as old, if not older. There is evidence, for example, of the Harappans sailing out from ports in Gujarat and in the Bronze Age. That's 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, and sailing out to Oman, to Bahrain, and all the way through to Mesopotamia. So it's a very, very old tradition. I've given talks on that as well. But today I'm going to talk about a sliver of that history, which is what were the kinds of ships that these ancient mariners used to sail. Now, unfortunately, we don't really know what the very earliest ships were like. So, what kind of ships did the Harappans use to go to the Middle East? We don't know. We have evidence that they did visit there, because we have Harappan beads, we have other Harappan products which are found in, for example, places like Oman. So they must have gone there and back and forth. We know obviously that Dholavira was a port, for example. So we know that there was trade, but we don't know what those ships look like. They are these very basic sort of sketches and drawings of what look like boats and ships in Harappan remains. but be very clear that those are river boats. This is very important thing I want to clarify, because people who are not familiar with ships and boats and things generally tend to club all these things together. It's not the case. It's like confusing a dentist with a cancer surgeon. They are totally different things. A riverboat and an ocean-going boat are completely different products, and the level of stresses, the design requirements, and so on are completely different for ocean-going ships. And I'm going to speak mostly about ocean-going ships. Nevertheless, we do have evidence in text, in evidence on in various kinds of drawings, sculpture, etc., of Indian ships and boats. And one of the things that comes across very, very strikingly is that this design that Indians used over long periods of time, till certainly the coming of the Europeans, used a peculiar technology, which is that they stitched these ships together. That's not because we didn't know about nails. As you know, we actually had one of the few countries in the world which actually had rust-free nails. We know that from the iron pillar right here in Delhi. But although occasionally we did use these rust-free nails for building boats and so on, but the dominant technology was effectively stitching these boats together, these planks together to create a hull using various kinds of ropes, particularly coir ropes. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Here is a boat relief from the Bhog Mandap in Jagannath Puri. And as you can see, these are not nailed together. You can see they are separate planks, and you can see that they are kind of stitched together. You can also see later on a boat from represented from the Babarnama, and there also you can see that there are sort of separate planks that are kind of put together. So this is the dominant design. Now, the interesting thing is that we have lots of evidence of what these ships were like. So, one of the evidences that we have is a book from the 9th century called the Yukti Kalpataru. It was put together supposedly by Raja Bhoj. And it has description of different kinds of ships. For example, it has a classification of ships into Samanya, which is ordinary, and Vishesha, specialized ships. And the Samanya ships were then classified into names like Shudra, Madhyama, Bhima, Chapala, and so on, according to size. And then you had ships that fall into special class, which are all seagoing, and they tend to be sub-classified as Dirgha, Unnata, and so on. So there's lots of classifications. Then they are classified according to what kind of cabins they had, and so on. And then you also have the lengths, breadths, and height. So these are of the specialized Vishesha ships. So you have the length in cubits, breadth, height, etc. And you can see if you go right down to the bottom, the Begini ship, which is the largest category, its length is 176 cubits. Now I have no idea whether you actually had ships that were that big, but 176 cubits is a very, very large ship, even by modern standards. And then, interestingly, look at the breadth and height. So they were long, narrow boats, which would require great skill, because they would be quite unstable with that 1:8 kind of ratio if you were using. Now, there are also foreigners' accounts of this. You have Ptolemy, for example, who says that Indian shipbuilders built a fleet of about 2,000 ships every year, each capable of accommodating 1,000 troops, horses, and vast quantities of supply. So the point I'm making is that these are not small ships, even if some of those descriptions and numbers are exaggerations, and very few ships of any were built to that size. Ship carrying 1,000 people is not a small ship, particularly with horses, elephants, and all kinds of things on it. Marco Polo also mentions, interestingly, ships of very large size with just a crew was 150 to 300 people, propelled by oars, sails, multiple decks, with 60 cabins. And interestingly, he mentions ships fastened with iron nails. I am mentioning this just to be sure that it is not that Indians didn't know about ships that were nailed together. There were ships, and Marco Polo talks about nailed ships. Then there's Niccolo Conti, who talks about ships weighing 1,000 tons. And then there is Santo Stefano, who came in 1450, just before Vasco da Gama, just a few decades before Vasco da Gama. And he talks about timbers of ships were stitched together with cords and nails made out of cotton. So there are all these descriptions of ships. So it's not just Indian text. Foreigners over a long period of time visiting the Indian Ocean world were talking about these enormous, gigantic Indian ships. Now, the point is, as I said, we have lots of contemporary texts and descriptions of these ships from the pre-European period. Now, we actually do not know why on earth they stitched them together, because obviously they knew about nailed ships, and they were, by the way, trading with peoples who were using nailed ships like the Chinese. So, so why did they use them? There's my own theory on this is, and I'm going to test it literally, is that we were sailing in waters that were full of atolls and shoals and so on. The Indian coastline does not have very good harbors, so it requires that very often you're using river delta or estuaries to go up to river ports and so on, which basically means that your biggest danger is not just the sea, but in fact getting stuck in a sandbar or coral reef or something like that. I mean, you've got the Lakshadweep and islands, Maldives and so on. So this, and remember, these guys are sailing always in the heaviest of seas. They're using the monsoon winds going back and forth. So it's not like you're sailing when the seas are calm. You're deliberately sailing at the time when the seas are rough. So if you're going in rough seas and your big danger was being thrown onto some coral reef, then the real thing you were scared of was not so much your ship sinking or the efficiency of the ship. The biggest danger really is that your ship breaks apart when it hits a sandbar or something. The good thing about having something stitched together is that yes, it hit something, it'll begin leaking, but it will not fall apart. So you have a chance when things calm down to somehow drag it onto the shore and maybe mend it in some fashion. So that is a big, big advantage that I think was the advantage. There were other stories as well, which I don't quite believe. But eventually, after the 16th century, this technique began to go into sharp decline. The reason for that is very simple: cannons. It wasn't just the cannons of the ships that of the Europeans. The problem is you couldn't adopt the cannons yourself, because if you used a cannon, the whiplash from your own cannon would eventually stretch the cords and cause leaks. So this is the reason ultimately the Indian shipbuilding had to abandon this, and by the time you have the Marathas, for example, the Maratha ships are basically were being built using the European technology and designs. I mean, Indianized, but European nailed type ships. So this technology ultimately basically shrunk till modern day into basically building small local boats the size of this stage and nothing much more. So there have been many generations since we have actually built a serious size ship using the stitch technology. But there are nice depictions of these old ships. One of them comes from the 5th century or so, is a painting in Ajanta cave number 2, which you can see. It has this ship. It has, you can see there are three sails. It's got a person there. It's obviously an artistic depiction, so it's not to scale, but gives you a general sense of these types of ships. You can see pots of water there. Presumably that was his water supply, and so on and so forth. So there are many depictions of these ships. And as I said, this is the only things that have been left of this. And even this is rapidly disappearing. So we may literally, the last generation of people who build these kinds of ships, boats, so even these little that is remembered will disappear within a generation or two. The children of these fishermen do not want to learn this. They'd much rather use fiberglass or metal boats. So this is rapidly disappearing art form in this country. So what is the aim of this project? The aim of the project is the reconstruction of an ocean-going sailing ship using the ancient Indian art of stitching. Why we did it? Because we want to revive the cultural memories of this great maritime tradition. India, for a variety of reasons, has got a very land-centric, landlocked view of itself. And I'm glad that INTAC is now beginning to embrace the maritime culture. But as I said, the idea is to create a sense of pride in India's maritime heritage, and also to undertake a few voyages along the sailing routes using traditional navigation methods. So, how do we go about building a stitch ship? So what do you need? Obviously the planks of wood, but what do you tie it with? You need coir ropes for stitching. These ropes are not, it's like the ones you get in the normal market, the coir ropes, except they are much heavier, tighter, and they have been built in a way that they're much a degree of a magnitude stronger than the usual ones. They are usually dipped in coconut oil and salt water repeatedly so that they are weathered. Then of course you need coir fiber for filling the joints. You need needles for stitching. You need kudrus resin, which is a natural gum, which will go between the wooden joints. You need fish oil, usually sardine or tuna oil, applied for durability of the wood, and is also along with the kudrus resin, which means that this thing really smells. But I have been assured that goes away after a while, but we'll see. And then we need red brick pigment for the external hull color, and for saving it from barnacles and other things. So how do you go about building it? So the ship building starts with the stern post, the keel post, and the stem post. So you can see this is the basic thing. Now, unlike in the nailed or even modern ships, which usually have a frame, and then you nail the planks on it, or for example, you have a modern ship, you put the frame up and then you weld the steel plates. This is not how stitch ships are made. Stitch ships, actually, you first build the hull, and then you insert a relatively light frame into it post facto. So as you can see, this is how you start building it. You basically build it upwards. And then what you have to do is how do you create the curved planks? So the way they do it is you take a steam chamber, you take these long planks of wood and different parts of different kinds of wood, and you put it in the steam chamber to basically make the fibers of the planks a little soft. Then when you pull it out, within about 60 seconds you've got to shape it into the shape you want, because it cools down and then it takes the shape which it does. And of course, if you make a mistake, that's the end of that plank. So this is a tough thing, and so this is how it's done. So here is, let me see if I can. This is the steaming chamber. We are taking out the steam, as you can see. These are the planks getting pulled out after being steamed. And then, having pulled it out, you then need to, after the steaming, this is the shaping process. As you can see, they have taken this steamed wood, and they have literally minutes before it again kind of dries up and takes shape. So they have to do this shaping as soon as they can. So it's being bent, as you can see, and then weights and other things are used. And this is all done by eye. And remember, they are being done in 3 dimensions. So it's not just curved out, but there's a slight twist in it as well. It has to be done exactly. And Babu Sankaran, who's our shipwright, does it basically by eye. So it's not been done by measurements. And I'll talk a little bit later about him as well. And then, of course, what you do, pairs of holes are drilled onto the tool planks. and then coconut fiber is laid for wadding over the joint, and then you use strands of coir rope to tie them together. And then kudrus resin is applied between the planks, wadding is hammered down, and the stitching follows this 1-1-X-1-1 kind of form. Then after you've got some part of the framing done, you can see that a frame is being stitched into to give it some sort of a shape. But remember, even after doing this, the hull does retain a certain amount of give in it. So when it hits a wave, it doesn't remain completely rigid. It sort of flexes a little bit all the time, which is an important issue when we will try to sail it, because we don't know how it behaves on high seas. And you can see then the stem post, stern post, all of these things are tied in, and you have the horizontal cross beams are then stitched together, and so on. And then the stitching holes, you then fill the plugs, the putty is applied with holes and plugs, obviously, as I said, coating of the fish oil inside and outside the hull to make it waterproof. So this is how an ancient ship is built. Now, how did we go about executing this project? So first of all, I came up with a concept design, and I then, once I had done some bit of the research, I then reached out to a naval architect who works in the Indian Navy, Hemant, who helped me kind of put a sketch together to it. And then we began to, once we had a detailed sketch, we managed to get the Honorable Prime Minister to give it its blessings, and then the Culture Ministry provided the funding under its Mausam program. The Ministry of Defense and the Navy have very kindly agreed to oversee the thing, and then also to provide a crew for it. There's obviously the Ministry of External Affairs for providing the foreign collaborations for the places we'll visit, and of course regulatory approvals from the Ministry of Shipping. So there are a large number of people who are involved, and of course the building of it is done by Babu Sankaran and team. Now Babu Sankaran comes from a family that comes from Bepur in Kerala. Their family have been building building ships for the last, as far as he can tell, maybe over 1,000 years. But they have not been building these stitch ships for a long time. The first time in generations, these have been really diminishing. So he did get picked up to do a project for the Omanis called the Jewel of Muscat. So he got some experience in that. But the thing is that the reason they're able to do some of this is because even though they didn't build large ships like this for generations, he had learnt as a child all the rules of thumb. So they still remember some of these things. So I'm using ancient text, depictions in ancient art, testimonies, and I'm using some traditional knowledge that is still remembered. And it's very important that we did it now, because he is literally the last generation that remembers all of this. Because his son doesn't want to do all of this. And so literally we are dealing with the last generation of people who have, so we're not only building it, we need to record this whole thing. So we started out, where do we start out? We started out with the Ajanta sailing ship painting I showed you earlier. So this is just a scheme drawing of it. So that you know what is it that we are attempting to build. It doesn't have to be exact. This is obviously a artistic depiction, but it's a good starting point. You can see there are main sails, 3 of them, foresail. Importantly, look, it does not have a rudder. It's got trailing oars. You can see that, and so on and so forth. It doesn't have a castle on top of the ship. It does have some decks, presumably below. And so you got some idea of what this might be the end point. This is from Ajanta, so this is from basically the 5th century, which makes it about the Gupta period ship. So here is what our concept design was. We took that into account, and so we built this. At least in the size of ship we were building, there's not enough space for 3 masts, so we have gone for 2. But we are retaining a foresail. We are retaining the idea of not having a rudder, but having a trailing oar. So you can see this is the scheme drawing, the concept design for it. And so you have a sense of the parameters. Its length is 21 meters, is a little wrong, 21 meters, breadth 6.5, depth is 3.3, weight is 50, and crew of about 18 can be carried on this ship. Development plans, so those who like technical details, this is what the development plans are. This is how the rigging plan is, so that you get some sense of how it will be rigged. Very important thing you need to know, this is from a period before the lantern sails. Those triangular sails that you see in modern sailing ships or even later ones, this will have square sails. This is important because it means that we have to basically sail with the wind. Once you have a lantern sail, you can sail at a significant angle to the wind. In fact, it may be more efficient sometimes to sail at a significant angle to the wind. Our ship cannot do that. It is completely built on the basis of square sails, which means wherever the wind takes us, we can we can use the trailing oars to make some angle to it, but by and large we have to go wherever it takes us. So this is an important point that I wanted to make. As I said, sail and mast plan. This is the stitching plan. These are the framing. You can see the crossbars and so on that comes. And this is a scale model, 1:10 scale model of the stitch ship that we built in order to test this thing out. So then before testing it out, this is how we built it out. We then said that not often that you build these kinds of ships. So we are actually subjecting it to many of the testing that is done to modern ship designs to see just what happens. And we'll then later on compare it to what happens with the actual measurements we take with the ship. But this is just so that you know that we are subjecting it to a lot of interesting testing. This is the model testing that we did, just so that you know what it looks like. Then we do all these things. Then the Department of Ocean Engineering did various wave basin tests in IIT Madras. And then of course there are other bits and pieces that we also, so as you can see, we are trying to be as true as possible to the ancient designs, but we are also adding some things, like for example, stone anchors. Now the stone anchors have existed from the beginning, but they have had different designs at different times. Now we don't know what stone anchors from the Gupta period were like, because there are stone anchors at various points. So we have chosen something which is a little ahistorical. We have gone for a stone anchor which is actually from a much earlier period, which is from the Harappan period. So although we do not know what the Harappan ships look like, the ocean going ships, we have actually many examples of Harappan stone anchors in many places, including in Dwarka. So in Dwarka you get these Harappan stone anchors. So we have decided that we'll go for an earlier period stone anchor. And this is what it looks like. Now you may wonder, how on earth does this work? So in order to understand how this works is, you see this is the triangle. The round one on top is where the rope goes in. Okay? The square holes below, squarish holes below, are there to allow sharpened stick to go through. So that provides when it falls on the ground, that is what attaches itself to the mud in the bottom, or to stones or whatever it is. So in case you're wondering how this works, this is the stone part. When we actually use it, it will have stone, these sticks going, or sharpened sticks jutting out of both sides. Then of course we have to give it some look of an Indian ship from that period. So we have sails and we have put some Indian stuff on it. The outer sail, most will have something called the Ganda Barunda, two-headed eagle. This is important because this ship is now being built in Hodi shipyards in Goa. And the Ganda Barunda was the symbol of the Kadambas, who were the kings in ancient times of Goa. We are also using a more generic symbol of the Surya as well. And you can see right in the front, there's the lion, which we have taken. It's from a Chalukya temple. Obviously, these things are not being exactly historically true. I mean, This is a Gupta period ship with a Chalukya period masthead. So we have taken a little bit of liberty, but we thought it should have a clearly Indian look from ancient times. So on 26th of February, this is what the ship looked like. We put it in water just to see whether it had leaks, etc. It doesn't seem to have too many leaks, so we have fixed whatever small ones existed. This happened to be the day of the Mahashivratri, so we put it in the water literally at 11:30. So, and then here is all the outfitting with all of this. You can also get a sense of the size from the photograph below, how big this ship is. And you can see that, all the things we have tried to use, we have used, like, for example, the pulleys, etc. We are using traditional wooden pulleys, not metal pulleys as you would today. So we have tried wherever, to the extent possible, retain the pre-modern look and feel of the whole thing. And you can see the sail as well with the Gandha Virunda painted. Then we have dry docked it back out, got all those things. You can see now this where the stitching all is. You can clearly see the stitching. And we are now painting the whole thing and making sure. I mean, despite all of this, there will be very quickly barnacles and other things growing on it. That's how life is, but I'm just saying. Now, what are we going to do with this ship? So, sea trials, we'll start literally in a few days. We'll begin to putting something into water and check it. So, literally last phase right now. Then the idea is on the 20th we'll be naming the ship. We haven't announced the name. Obviously, it has one, but the stitch ship will soon be named. It will be a part, interestingly, of the Navy's fleet. So it will be a proper naval ship, INSV, whatever the name is. So it'll be, and then we are going to do a couple of voyages with them. The very first voyage is going to go from Mandvi in Gujarat to Muscat in Oman. This is again a traditional route, which hopefully end of this year we will be doing. Before that, we will have to obviously do a lot of sea trials with this. Nobody alive knows how to sail these ships. So and there are many, many elements in these ships which we actually just don't understand. First of all, what happens in heavy seas when a flexible hull hits a real serious wave? We don't know. What happens, how do you maneuver with contra winds with a square sail, which frankly you can't sail at an angle to the wind. So what do? You don't have a rudder, you have these trailing oars. That's good news or bad news, who knows. And how do all of these elements and other archaic elements of the ship interact with each other? So it's not just each bit, but how they all interact with each other, we don't know. So all of those issues are issues we will have to work out. So we will be testing it quite heavily in the next few days. Then 3 months we'll have to shut it down because the monsoons are just too heavy. We don't want to risk the ship. So we'll be keeping it Karwar in the Navy facility there during the monsoons. And then we will then take it out hopefully in late September, October, November, sail it as much as possible before we attempt to do this first crossing at some point in December of this year. Now, supposing that turns out to be a success, and that, fingers crossed, we will then attempt a more ambitious voyage in the end of next year, which will be from Odisha to Bali. Many of you may know of the festival called Bali Jatra, which commemorates ancient voyages. So we will try to literally recreate them during Kartik Purnima 2026. But I want to point out to you that given the technology and also the descriptions that we have of these voyages, it is not a matter of just sailing across. You can't do that. You have to actually use the winter winds, which are blowing from north to south, to actually sail from either Tamralipti or Konarak or one of these places down towards Mahabalipuram. From Mahabalipuram, you have to sail further down south to Sri Lanka, and then from there further south to where the equatorial currents are. Interestingly, sailing from the Indian subcontinent, the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent, to Sumatra is not done by winds, because you don't have prevailing winds there. it is done purely on the basis of currents. And then you cross, and then you have a choice. You can either go across through the Malacca Straits or along the outside to essentially to Bali. So this is how that voyage used to be done. That's a much longer voyage. The first one is 2 to 3 weeks. This is 3 months. So it's a much longer and more complicated. It also happens to be that the Bay of Bengal is a very tough place to sail in that season. That it happens to be the hurricane season. You can see what we care about, obviously wind patterns. So we will be doing voyages out of India, so we will be using the winter winds. But when these ships used to come back, or when we do the return voyages, they'll have to be done using the summer winds, the summer monsoons. Winds matter. The surface currents will matter depending on the time. You will have to care about the wave heights and so on. And that's where we are at with this project. Right now, just so that you know, as this project was getting done, in late 2023, the Sultan of Oman had come here. So His Highness the Sultan of Oman and the Honorable Prime Minister made a joint statement that this voyage will happen in end 2025. So that is why all of this is coming together in the hope of being able to hit that deadline. So with that, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
Namaste Sanyal sir, Sanjeev sir. Sabse pehle, I'm very, very happy to see you. When I was growing up, my mom would always try to encourage me by saying that, you know, इतना अच्छा बनो कि आप इतना अच्छा डॉक्टर बनो कि आप एक दिन हेल्थ मिनिस्टर के साथ काम करो, आप इतना अच्छा कुछ करो कि आप प्राइम मिनिस्टर के साथ काम करो. So congratulations for living the dream of many mothers. And all the very best for your ship project. May Lord Varuna be with you. And it's a subjective question. I'd like to ask you, like, अभी आप जैसे situation में हो, आप identify कर पाते हो, okay, this is जो मेरे आज सामने situation है, and you know, you look back and okay, वो चीज़ ने मुझे ये सिखाया या वो चीज़ ने मुझे ऐसा बनाया कि आज I'm here and आज I have to tackle this situation. Could you share any instance or anything that comes to your mind?
That's a somewhat complicated question. But let me say that there is no particular reason that I should be doing this. So if your question is, how did I, economist, end up designing a ship and I'm actually going to attempt to sail it, there is no particular explanation for it. Just like there is no particular explanation why I'm an economist. When I was 18, nobody would have guessed that I had any particular interest in becoming an economist. I was what would, at that age when I was in my high school, have been described as those science types, science maths type. So I was very much physics, maths, biology, those kinds of subjects. I'm generally a curious type, so I read, write, do many things. But nobody would have generally identified me as somebody who would have done this. Certainly none of my teachers or my parents would have thought that I would one day get well known as a writer. So I have reached here by the randomest of routes, and I'm not going to try and explain it. I just happen to do it, that's all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please keep your questions brief so that we can take more questions.
Yeah, the lady there. So there are different bits of it have different wood. So for example, there is something called jackwood, not jackfruit, jackwood. So jackwood is very heavy, so that is what is used for the keel. And then there are different parts of the ship that have different woods. We have taken whatever either from Babu Sankaran's memory or what we could find some textual evidence. So we have not tried to guess what it is.
Amit.
There's no oars, you cannot possibly row across. It's purely sails. If we attempted to row across, we would die because there are 18 of us, and we would, I mean, that would mean, keep aside, let's say, 2 people for being the captain and first mate or whatever. So 16 people, 4-hour shifts. Just imagine what would happen to those people trying to make a 20 feet, 4 hours, 4 people rowing. No way. So this is purely, that's why I told you, never confuse ocean-going ships with river boats. So the ocean-going boats which want to go any long distance would never use oars. War galleys may occasionally use oars for short distances because they want to fight some battle, but you cannot cross a large body of water using oars. So that's why river boats are a completely different design logic.
Hi. You mentioned you would be documenting
Where
it.
are you, sorry?
Here.
Yeah,
You mentioned you would be documenting it, but will there be real-time documentation accessible by the public? And
yeah. So you can, in fact, right now you can go and film it yourself. So we do have a document.
No, your journey, I mean.
No, so that we will take some people who will document it on the boat.
So real-time? Like
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We will. We don't know whether we'll be able to upload it depending on what the satellite situation is, but I do intend to have my own GoPro.
Oh, thank you.
If that's what you're asking, yes, we will document it. That's part of the fun of it.
Thank you, sir. First of all, congratulations. This is a phenomenal project. My question was, how did you arrive on coir as a material for the ropes? And my second question is, do we have evidence that stitching the wood together means we didn't use nails?
Well, there are many texts and many places where it says these are stitched together. It's possible they use some odd nail here or there. I'm sure they were not purists. But we have built it without nails. But I'm sure at that time there may have been parts of the ship that may have had a nail or two. I'm not trying to be religious about this matter. But we have, for at least the hull, we have not used any nails at all. And we didn't need to. So far, we have not had to do it also. So Babu Sankaran's rules of thumb have so far got us. And we have one other example. He had been a part of a project by the Omanis called the Jewel of Muscat, where they had also built a stitch ship, not of our design, but of the Arab dhow design from a later period. This is from the 5th century, they built it from the 10th century. So he had some experience in this. So we have used his experience extensively, and we had to, which is good. So, it's not completely, it's like this. If somebody textually described an elephant, and then you tried to draw or sketch an elephant from a purely text-based description of it, the likelihood is that you would end up with a real poor representation. So the good news is, as I said, we have this odd pieces of evidence. We also, as I said, Babu has actually been a part of a different project with a somewhat different design, but nevertheless something where he has some idea of what he's doing, or at least we hope so.
Okay.
Yes, you can. There's several people.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks. Hi. I have a couple of questions. One is there any information, anything available as to how the Cholas built all those ships? No, because Lords of the Sea.
Yeah. So Cholas are from a later period, 500,
10th century.
about 5 centuries later.
Yeah, 10th century. Yeah.
So I am assuming that, and remember this Indian Ocean world is quite integrated. So they are swapping designs with each other all the time. So, but they are also sailing different designs. So, for example, we know that the Indonesians were sailing some significantly different design, which is the Borobudur ship. You may have seen depictions. Now, those Borobudur ships have those called they're multi-hulled ships. Basically, there's the main hull, and then they have these two what are they called? It's like catamarans, basically. So they have these. So they had a different design. Now, the Chola ships were very likely to be largely single hull ships like the ones I did, but probably closer in design to the ones that the Omanis have built.
The 10th century.
Yeah, that in the 10th century. Partly because the Omani ship is based on on the Betaling wreck, which was found in Southeast Asia. So the Omanis don't have a wreck on their end. They actually found an Omani ship wreck in Southeast Asia on which they built. But I'm presuming since it is in Southeast Asia, it must have gone past India. At the very least, the Indians were aware of this ship design. We don't know for sure. But let me say that even South India, even very specifically Tamil shipbuilding would have gone through many, many stages. Because the Cholas are actually the last phase of the great sailing era. The great sailors of the Tamil history are in fact not the Cholas at all, but the Pallavas. And the Pallavas have a longer history. In fact, their influence on Southeast Asia is much greater than that of the Cholas. The scripts of the Southeast Asia are not based on the Chola scripts, but on the Pallava scripts. One of the greatest kings of the Pallavas, Nandivarman II, was of Southeast Asian origin. He clearly looks Oriental, even in his sculptures and so on. So there is clearly a long tradition. And when I'm saying I'm building the ship from a particular period, do be clear that other parts of the country at other parts of time would have built other kinds of ships. Now, there will be some similarities, but as I said, as the evidence grows, we will. Later period ships, we have much better evidence. For example, we have paintings and descriptions of Maratha era ships, but that is very recent, I mean just 3 centuries ago.
So the stitch ships are only of this 5th century?
No, I think they were being used all the way through to the arrival of the Europeans. It's really with the end of the 15th century, early 16th century, where the obvious superiority of naval cannonry, which the Portuguese clearly managed to take over the Indian Ocean region. But my sense is that the Indians and the Arabs and others continue to use some sort of stitch ship for merchant purposes for significant length of time afterwards. But then the Europeans' designs were clearly better, and so we must have begun to adopt them. But because by the time in the late 17th, early 18th century, when you see the Maratha ships being built, they are clearly derived from European designs.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was very interesting. Just about the sails that you mentioned, the square versus the triangular, would that have impacted the usage of the ships in terms of, like this is requiring more, this has more maneuverability and it requires lighter
So
winds and
remember, this is
able to go more
we are trying to
distances.
do a cultural recreation. For those people, it was a practical issue. But once the lantern sail became standard, many people shifted onto it, and you will see there are other programs that they will talk a lot about the lantern sail. The lantern sail has one major advantage, is that you can sail at a very significant angle to the wind. But that requires the design to have certain elements. For example, you will have not just the lantern sail itself, but the way the mast works with the boom being shiftable and so on. But even then, later European ships were still using various kinds of square sails. In the 18th century, ships have square sails and lantern sails. And then you have the rudder as well, which is different from a trailing oar. So all of these things co-evolved over time.
But most Indian ships at that period, your research shows up, were they using square
No, so square sails are clearly used in the 5th century. There is no sign of lantern sails being used in the ancient period. Lantern sails were an innovation of the Indian Ocean, by the way, but there is no evidence that they were using square lantern sails at this period.
Congratulations for your project, and it is a very good thing that you have converted imagination into reality. May I know that any component of your project could be beneficial for maritime security?
Not today. I mean, I'm not going to attempt to raid Karachi harbor with this. But who knows? We might discover that this is, radar proof and this is the way to do it. But that is not the primary objective of this.
Hi, Sanjeev. Thank you so much for this. It was worth my trip all the way to Delhi. Very recently, I read about all your work, and I'm so impressed and I'm so happy that I could be here. One quick question was, I understand that Omani ship, which is based like the Dhow, which is much later, is there a reason why you picked the 5th century, or did you have any other drawing or some kind of reference to a ship prior to the 5th, or was this the best depiction?
So this is the best I could get.
Okay.
There is only one other clearly ocean-going ship that I know of, which is a Satvahana period coin.
Right, I know.
Which also sort of looks like this, by the way.
Yeah.
But that is just very, very rudimentary.
Okay.
So I couldn't do anything based on it. So the earliest one I could find, which is that one, and so I use that.
Okay, well, fantastic. We're looking forward to seeing it. Yeah, sail. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Sanjeev. Hi, here.
Where? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. You happen to mention the Bali Yatra. So I just wanted to ask, since it is including a lot of area of Indian Ocean, are you looking at transnational narratives as well, like in the broader sense of Project Mosam or something like that? So are you looking at text beyond boundaries that may have influenced the shipbuilding in India?
Yeah, these people were doing all kinds, as I told you right in the beginning. They were swapping, I'm sure they were swapping ideas and technologies and so on. You know, that somebody else can do the research. My idea was to take a best guess of what a Gupta period ship was going to look like, see what the evidence was, and try and recreate something and try and actually sail it to see what happens. I'm not trying to prove some, the origins of all of these technologies. These are co-evolved, and since we were trading across these large landscapes over long periods of time, who knows what is the source of some of these ideas and technologies?
Yeah, Dr. Sanjeev, I think shipping is the oldest mode of transportation in comparison to air and road. And Mr. Nitin Gadkari is also trying to promote this shipping. And we can convey message through cleaning of Ganga and Jamuna also. Do you think it can serve this purpose also?
No, this is not related to that at all. I'm all in favor of cleaning up the Yamuna and Ganga. But as I said, this is a purely maritime effort. And these designs are completely ocean-going. River designs are totally different.
So one last question, if you allow me to ask that.
Sure.
I'm very curious to know, when you undertake the sail, the actual sail to Oman, what is your safety net going to be? God forbid,
So let me say that when I presented this, the last phase a few weeks ago to the Honorable Prime Minister, he said, he turned to me and said, I'll give you one piece of advice, doobna mat. So let me tell you, I take that very seriously, my boss's views. Look, I'm going to be on that ship, so if it sinks and I turn into shark food, I will be quite unhappy. So I do take that matter quite seriously. We will be having some modern safety equipment, including inflatable getaway rafts. We will have some, life-saving equipment. We will, although we intend to sail by using the stars, we will have GPS and radio and all this sort of thing. So yes, it's not the case that we are not paying any attention to the safety aspect. In fact, one of our biggest dangers is an entirely modern danger, which the Gupta period would not have faced, which is other ships. You see, we are a small bobbing ship. We can't change direction. So if a large tanker happens to be coming our way, it doesn't matter how big they are, it's their problem to change direction. Now, that is not an easy thing said. So we will be having to put up these lights on top of our sails thing. We will make sure that our position is continuously updated in the shipping lines. There is, just like the flight tracker, there's also a ship tracker. Our coordinates will have to be put in there, and we will have to have a transponder telling us. Just so that you know, when I've been in touch with Captain Saleh of the Omani project, the Jewel of Muscat. So I asked him which was his scariest part of his voyages. So he said that, look, because they had sailed from Oman, come to India, and then gone across to Singapore. So he said, look, we faced many big storms and they were terrible, etc. But the really scary part is the Straits of Malacca. Because we are sailing through it, and there are these gigantic ships going right past us on both sides, and we have no idea whether they've seen us. We hope they have, but if they decide for whatever reason to even make a small detour, I mean, it doesn't even have to be them banging into you. It just the wake from some of those gigantic ships will just cause a lot of disruption. So, as I said, sometimes, the things you have to be careful about may be different from what you think.
Thank you, Sanjeev. May I request Chairman Shri Ashok Singh Thakurji to hand over a token of our appreciation to the guest speaker. Some intact publications and a small little bust of a lady. Thank you, Sanjeev, both for the presentation and the research that must have gone into gathering and piecing together very, very important part of our ancient Indic technique and methodology for shipbuilding. And of course, I have to say here that we look forward to many more you coming and presenting more content here at Intact. So please do not become shark feet. Be safe and come back safely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. And now we have a cup of tea waiting outside.